Well, welcome to the Pastors on Porn podcast. Unlike my other podcast, Finding Traction, this one doesn't have a fancy intro or music. It's just a no-nonsense look at some of the issues that are around pastors and ministry leaders who are also struggling with sexual issues in their life. And today I want to start a two-part podcast around this whole idea of being conflicted or non-conflicted when we're in ministry and we're struggling. And today I have a guest with me, Darrel Brazzell from, I think I pronounced that right, from Lawrence, Kansas. Is that right, Darrell?
Well, actually it's Darrel Brazzell, but close
Darrell,
enough.
Sorry, Darrell.
I've had it butchered worse.
Okay, Darrell Brazzell. Got it?
Brazzell. Yeah.
Okay. And Darrell wrote an article called Breaking Point. And the byline was one pastor's story of pain, porn, and addiction. And I want to just read a couple paragraphs that start that article, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what got him in that situation. So here's Darrell's article at the beginning of it. It says this: it's 1:45 p.m. on Tuesday, and I'm logging on the internet to check my email, read a newspaper article, and begin research for Sunday's sermon. Well, that's what I'm trying to convince myself. But I know exactly what I'm doing. When my secretary leaves at 2, I will be alone in the building. I will check my email, and I may read an article or two, but as soon as the door closes behind her, I will do what I have done more times than I care to count. I'll type sex or porn or something worse in the search engine, and I'll spend the next 3 or 4 hours in the pig pen. I will enter a trance that leads me to neglect important projects, ignore phone calls, and lose track of time. Eventually, I will look at the clock and panic because my wife was expecting me home 15 minutes ago, and I have just started trashing files, clearing the search history, and doing what I can to put myself back together. I'll use every minute of my drive home to create an excuse for being late. I'll try to put on a good face, even though I know pornography makes me real connection impossible. Usually, I fail miserably and end up in a fight with my wife in my first 30 minutes at home. On Wednesday, I'll go to the office committed to not answer the siren call of porn sites. I'll start in the morning in prayer, confessing my sin and begging God to give me a fresh start. I'll return the phone calls I ignored on Tuesday and work diligently on my midweek lesson. I'll do fine all morning, but when the secretary leaves, the battle will rage again. Most Wednesdays I'll win, though I'll still feel the shame of Tuesday when I stand before my evening Bible class. Thursday is usually a nightmarish repeat of Tuesday. Friday is Repentance Day. Time and time again, Friday begins with tearful prayers, begging for God's mercy and promising next week will be different. I then scramble to write my sermon. Sunday mornings, I arrive at the building early so I can beg God for a fresh start and finish my sermon. Standing in the pulpit Sunday after Sunday, I constantly hear the inner condemnation. Who are you to proclaim God's holy word? And what would they think if they knew? One Sunday, Satan pounded me throughout the worship service so intensely that during the song before communion, I seriously contemplated not partaking. Imagine what it would look like if the pastor on the second row refused the elements. So is how Darrell starts his article, which is the article Breaking Point. And Darrell, thank you for being on the show. I read that. I know it was in a Chuck Swindoll magazine and other places. And I just boy, that really captured the living hell of a conflicted pastor. Just describe for me a little bit of how you ended up in that situation.
Well, I ended up in that situation pretty much like most men do. I grew up in a disconnected family. I grew up in a very religious family, but no real emotional connection, and from a family with its own sexual shame that was handed down from who knows how many generations prior to that. And so even though I grew up in the church, knew God from an early age, loved God, felt a call to ministry, there was just all the ingredients were together so that the way I describe it many times, it's like I had a bonfire that was pre-stacked with wood pallets. And so I had all it pre-stacked with wood pallets and soaked in gasoline. And so when I was 11 years old, first pornography I saw, that was the match, but the bonfire was already in place. And so, my high school was spent finding porn when I could, and at the same time trying to uphold this leader of the youth group, good Christian persona. But I've got this big secret that nobody knows about.
Right.
And so when I went to college, I felt called in the ministry by the time I was probably 16. And so I went to college thinking, well, when I get to college, then surely studying God's word and studying for ministry, that'll get me victory. And while in college, my experiences with pornography were fairly limited because my access was really limited. But even in college, I found it. I had a roommate at one point that kept some pornography. I would, during the summer, I worked as a summer intern, and I'd drive 35 miles to another town to rent a VCR and videotapes. Again, I'm giving away some of my age, but but it was just, that was the ritual. I'd take it home back to where I was staying. I'd watch for 30 minutes or less, and then I'd drive the 35 miles back and return it all, and then say, I'll never do this again.
Right.
And then I talked an incredible young woman into marrying me, and realized right away almost that I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Not because there was anything wrong with her, but because I realized that I'd given the person whose opinion of me mattered the most 24/7 access to discover what a fraud I was.
Right.
And so in that terrified place, then the cycle would repeat, because what did I do when I was afraid? Well, I'd learned to medicate. I'd learned to, medicate through porn, through lust, through self-gratification. And as a result of that, it was just a constant pattern. And then my first ministry job was a youth pastor's position. And then after that, when I was 20, I was only 24 when I took my first solo ministry preaching position. And it was in a fairly small church, but with a secretary, but I was on my own.
Yeah. And
when I was on my own, this was, the story that you read is from about 1995 1996, 97 is when that experience is from. It was fairly early days in the internet. I thank God it was before a smartphone and in the slow days of dial-up.
Right.
And yet, even there, the damage was just as great. It just took longer.
Right.
And as a result of that, it was a day after day struggle with this intense battle with shame of, you're supposed to be the spiritual leader, and here you are in this pig pen, here you are in this mess, and you can't tell anybody.
Yeah.
Because telling anybody could mean your job, it could mean your marriage, it could mean so many horrible content. So it can mean some horrible consequences, or so it seemed. And yet, in hindsight, I look back and say, "Oh, how I wish I would have told somebody sooner."
Right. Boy, Darrell, I mean, it's funny as you share that, I'm going, do I have a doppelganger out there? The playbook that you were working off. Oh my goodness. It's so similar to mine. And my real crisis happened with the high-speed internet, but boy, I remember the renting of VCR machines and lugging these big, heavy machines over your shoulder, oh my goodness. It's so you find yourself, as I read in the article, in this completely conflicted place, trying to follow God's call on your life, because obviously that was a real thing that had really led you into ministry, but yet also, as you described, this siren call of all these other things that had been embedded coming into ministry. So, I mean, what was the catalyst that, that change began to happen? Was it an internal thing? Was it external consequences? Was it a combination of both? At some point, obviously, there was a bit of a breaking point or a change point. Describe a little bit of how that began to walk itself out in your life.
Well, in this early in 1999, I was very discontented with my current church, my current position. I had a lot of resentments built up. And so I had the belief that what I needed was a change of scenery. So I started job hunting, had some real disappointing, one especially disappointing experience of a job I thought I had, a place I wanted to live. And anyway, after that, I ended up in Lawrence, Kansas with a church that had pretty much just begged me to come. And so I came here, and I came here with the plan, okay, I'm going to go a year without looking at porn, and then I can talk about it. Well, now let me backtrack. Even before that commitment, I was committed, okay, the change of scenery, I'm going to tell some people right up front, I'm going to get some accountability.
Right.
And so maybe the second or third week of my new church, I put out a sign-up sheet for a men's accountability group.
Oh my.
And I was fully intending to share with them that I struggle in this arena, and the old accountability principle, and I need you guys to ask me the hard questions. I need you to hold me accountable. And I just knew that would be my solution.
Yeah, don't forget the last question. Did you just lie to me? You got to add that one in too.
Exactly. And then to my horror, something I hadn't even thought about was that 2 of the 5 guys who signed up to be on the accountability group were the elders who hired me and brought me to the church.
Oh no. Okay.
And I literally picked up that paper off the back table. We were meeting at a school, so I was cleaning up stuff, and I saw the names on that, and just sheer terror hit me.
Wow.
Like, I can't say anything about this now. So that's when I shifted gears and said, okay, but if I make it a year, then I can talk about it over a year ago before coming here. And then, it's the past, and then it's a safe thing in my mind.
Okay.
Well, I made it a few months. Well, I didn't really, but my struggles were less than they were. And I always found a way to minimize them, justify them, kind of explain them away. I look back now, and I was having major crashes even in those months.
Yeah.
But about 6 months after coming here, my wife went out of town, and her and my daughter were not out of the driveway before I was firing up her new computer and the modem.
Yep.
And I was in the pig pen for a couple days. And I can vividly remember thinking about places on I-70 where there was a sharp enough turn, a steep enough hill, that if I drove my truck off of there, that I could end it all.
Right.
And yet it would look like an accident, because I didn't want, the suicide thing to be over my wife and my daughter. And by the grace of God, I didn't have any life insurance at the time.
Right.
And that was one of the ways God kind of held me back.
Wow.
But it was at that point that I knew I had to find help. I knew this time the pain of where I was at was so great that I knew I couldn't go on this way anymore. And so I committed that I would tell my wife when she came home. I'd told her twice previously, the tip of the the very, very tip of the iceberg, twice previously. But I was committed to tell her the whole truth. It took me about 2 months, and I did it in a horrible way. So I won't go into that. But that really began my journey out. And so in that place, God was incredibly gracious to me. He brought a young man in my church who confessed his struggle. And I said, well, you must be the one I've been praying for. I found some resources. Can you and I start meeting on a weekly basis? And it was out of that he and I both walked out of this struggle over the next year. And that was going back February of 2000 is my sobriety date. Wow. And when God got my attention, it didn't just get my attention, because I think that was, and especially one of the reasons I was interested in your topic is that there was never a day in my life that I didn't know and believe that looking at pornography was wrong.
Right.
There was never a day that I did it that I could justify it at all in my mind. It was always, I hate this. I don't want to do this, but I could not do it.
Right.
And so I was always looking for a way out.
Right. And the idea, the level of despair that you describe, it's so poignant in terms, if I can't find a way out of this addiction, I'm looking for another way out that would somehow protect me from, or my family from, the shame or whatever. That's just as despairing as it gets when you go, I will do whatever to get out of this, even if it means ending it all. That's the level of conflicted dissonance to find yourself in. And I love the fact that God's grace sometimes is in the form of a guy that shows up at your church, a young guy. And that still must have taken real courage to take with a young guy, because you're supposed to be his leader, I'm guessing, right? So it was the beginning of your process.
Well, it's like one of the chapters of my manual. I talk about desperation versus despair.
Right.
And desperation is necessary. I was desperate. And so it would not have mattered who he was, whoever had come, whoever God sent my way to say, hey, I'm struggling here, that would have been who I would have shared with, because I was desperate enough at that place that I knew I had to have somebody to walk with me. Now, with that said, I will also tell you that first year of recovery, especially, I didn't walk with transparency with him near in the ways that I could have, nor that I needed to.
Right.
Because I still had trouble taking off my pastor's hat.
Sure. Now,
I still had to be the leader. I still had to have my act together, so to speak. And that really retarded my progress for a long time.
Now that whole idea of, I remember reading that, because we've used your manual in our groups and loved it. That desperate versus despair. Tell me, just describe that difference again. How I heard what you just described as desperate. How is that different than despair? Because you use the verses there.
Well, despair is that place of hopelessness.
Right.
Despair is that, despair would have had me drive my truck off of a place that would end my life. That's the place where despair is when I see my sin and my predicament so great there is no hope. Desperation is the place where I realize there is no hope for me in and of myself, but I can believe that God has a lifeline for me somewhere. And whenever that lifeline comes, I'm going to grab hold of it with every ounce of strength I have.
Right.
And so despair says I give up. Desperation says, okay, God, I will do whatever it takes. I will do anything you ask me to do. I will, you name it, I'll do it.
I love that distinction. That's so helpful in light of this. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I've been working through with one of my groups, Surfing for God, a book with Michael Cusick, and he describes the process. And he was doing a chapter. I was working on questions this morning, and he describes, even once I reached out, he describes a 4-year process by which it really needed to embed some of that, the brain chemistry and some of those changes. The idea of reaching out and starting a path doesn't mean that it happens instantly, or it's not without a relapse, or it's not without failures along the way. That's helpful as well. But you definitely can look at, you said a certain year when you started the pathway towards recovery.
Sure. And, February 2000 is, kind of my benchmark.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'll say is that for many years before that, I was trying.
Right.
I was doing everything I knew how to, minus the most important thing. And that was getting outside of my own head.
Right.
And allowing others into my struggle with me.
Right.
I was trying to defeat toxic sexual shame
mm-hmm.
by myself. And nobody does that. Nobody.
Yeah. No, and that's really well said. It's like somebody, an AA saying, I think, is it's your own best thinking which gets you into the predicament. It has to be outside of yourself. Well, Darrell, tell us a little bit about some of the things you're up to now. I know you're pastoring. I know you do a lot of work around. I listened to you on the Restored to More podcast with Clinton and Charity. That was a great podcast. And I had one of the guys in my Saturday morning group that bought an entire box of some of your manuals because they found them so helpful. Just describe a little bit of what you're doing in terms of the ministry you have right now. I know you're pastoring, but I also know that you're working with individuals. I'd love to hear a little bit of that. And then also for pastors and anybody who wants to connect with you, just give me a bit of a sketch as to what you got your hands into right now.
Sure. Well, since 2001, we've run groups for men here in Lawrence, Kansas, wrestling with pornography, sexual addiction. One of my strong convictions from my own journey in my first year is that the most important thing we need is connection.
Right.
And that, it's been said, I forget exactly who does it, but there's the Rat Park experiment. And they have the conclusion of that is that the opposite of addiction is connection.
Right.
And I absolutely believe that. And so we've run groups for men for almost 20 years now here in Lawrence, where we have a very simple format of guys come and we have what we call big group time where we talk recovery. We're usually talking through the next chapter of my manual or somebody else's material or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then we break up into groups of 3 or 4 men and have what we call our check-in time. And our check-in time is where each guy gets into the nitty-gritty of where they're at for the week and what their goals are and what accountability needs they have, et cetera, are. And so that's been our format. And then on top of that, my wife has run a group for wives of men in our groups. She's run that for 16 years now.
Oh my.
And that's been an incredible blessing. And then out of those two things, well, not just those two things, but in general, then I do a lot of individual and couple work with men and their wives in this process of recovery, helping them to get things clearly on the table, helping them to navigate the difficulties that come once the trauma of betrayal is out on the table.
Right.
And so helping wives deal with betrayal trauma, helping husbands learn, how do I become a man of integrity? How do I really stay on an honest path even when I fail? And how that can begin to restore trust and rebuild a marriage.
Okay.
And then out of that, the COVID stuff of the last year has forced us we live in the strictest, most liberal county in the state of Kansas, if not the Midwest.
Okay.
So we've been under very tight mask and no meeting orders since very early on. So we jumped to the Zoom format.
Yep.
And the bad thing about that is my local area guys have really been robbed of the face-to-face interactions. Mm-hmm. Though it's interesting, a bunch of the guys have been meeting in our parking lot now as long as the weather will allow it. And even with a fire pit. So we get creative because they've learned just how valuable the connection is. But
Absolutely.
then out of that, we've also been running our groups by Zoom. And then that's opened up doorways to where we've got guys from Canada and Africa and Pennsylvania and all over the place that are now connecting into our Zoom groups as well. So it's been a blessing for those outside of our area, and a real a significant loss for those who can do the Zoom groups but miss the the real time, fully synchronized face to face connections.
Yeah, we were able to go back to face on our Saturday morning groups, but we're back in the upswing again of the third wave. So we'll see how long that lasts. Now, how do people connect with you? You got a website or an email, Darrell?
Yeah, the easiest way to connect with me is at our website, newhopeforsi.com. And that's New Hope, the number 4, and then SI for sexual integrity. So that's shorthand for newhopeforsexualintegrity.com.
Okay.
And the contact link there comes directly to me. And then there's also information there on our Zoom groups. There's some of my teachings on there. And that's the easiest, best way to get connected with me.
Okay. Well, Darrell, I so appreciate having you on. I know hearing your story, I know, for example, so many pastors would have journeyed with you in that story. And even the story of seeing that list of your elders on there and going, the panic, what am I going to do now? Or how can I tell or not tell, or what all could go wrong if this becomes public, and just, the power of that. But I think your story is to say, there is a way to reach out and move forward. And so I know next week I'm going to do a podcast on what does it look like if you have left feeling conflicted and now you're in a non-conflicted place where you just come to accept or settle with these addictions. So that's for next week's podcast. So we'll see all you guys on next week's podcast called The Non-Conflicted Pastor. So again, we'll see you guys next week. And again, thank you, Darrell, for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.